Well, welcome everybody and good afternoon. I'm Letha Filderman and I'd like to welcome you to PopTech's virtual conversation series. We're really delighted tonight to be joined by two amazing speakers, Sinan Aral and Scott Galloway, and my longtime colleague and the host of PopTech, Moran Cerf. And we'd like to extend a big thanks to Brittany Jones, Nick Martin, and the whole team at Tech Change for helping us make these events possible. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Moran so we can kick off what is certain to be a provocative conversation this evening.
Thank you, Lita, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have everyone back for another gathering. The root of today's gathering is actually on the eighth floor of the NYU Stern building, where the three of us, Scott, Sinan, and myself, coexisted 10 years ago in 2010. Since then, Sinan voyaged north to MIT Sloan. I voyaged to the Midwest Kellogg, but we occasionally regroup in various occasions like today's gathering. And not only did a lot happen since 2010 in the world, a lot has happened even since we scheduled this gathering. So about a month ago, we said it's time to have this gathering. And I think that almost all the topics that I was going to raise today's gathering change. There's so many things that will come up today, even 24 hours ago, this morning. Updates that are relevant for the topic of today's conversation. We titled the gathering digital disruption, and I think that there's a beautiful quote that Scott has in his book from Vladimir Lenin, where it says that there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And in many ways, I feel that this topic encapsulates those very many things that happened in the last couple of weeks, months that we're all interested in. Both Scott and Sinan had a book come out during last year. Part of the topic we're going to talk about is the essence of their books, but also how their books reflect on different angles of the coronavirus, the last election, healthcare, and how all of those together can be used for good in the coming years by people like the audience of this gathering. I want to start by saying that one of the interesting things that stood out to me in both books when I read them is the fact that both Scott and Sinan really take bold statements and they really make predictions. Sometimes you see people being asked a question and their answer is a difficult question. It's important to think about it. Kind of like cop out answers. This is not what you're gonna expect. You're gonna get answers. Both books have concrete, practical kind of take-home messages, call for actions, predictions, ambitious answers to the question that they pose, and the journeys in both books take you from their personal experiences to their thoughts, views throughout the writing of the book, and what they think we should all do. So you're really in for a treat. The way we're going to orchestrate this afternoon is that I'm going to introduce Sinan and Scott briefly in a few seconds, and then we're going to have Sinan first spend about 8 minutes, kind of presenting his take on today's topic, disruption, and then he's gonna pass the baton to Scott, who's gonna spend a few more minutes talking about his take on that, and then we're gonna open it for first three-way conversation with some questions I prepared on their books and their views on recent events, and then we're gonna take questions from everyone here. So feel free to post those questions in the chat. I'll try to read them. Brittany and Dita, of course, will make sure that I'm not missing out any important thing that you guys think should be addressed, and to make it really kind of friendly and intimate the way we hope it will be. We also make sure that we're gonna leave at the end a specific time for really everyone's kind of interest. In normal conferences, people when the talk is over, get to the speaker one-on-one and ask him or her questions. We wanted to recreate this experience. So we asked both Scott and Sinan to stay after and really take any question on various topics with people here. So we're gonna end with some time for you basically to take it as personal and relevant to what you care about as you want. Okay. So let me introduce quickly our two speakers this afternoon. Sinan, professor of management, information technology, marketing, and data science. There's only operations that he's not a professor. Other than that, he covers the entire business school at MIT Sloan. He's a director of the MIT Initiative on Digital Economy and a founding partner at Manifest Capital. That's the third company that he's right now running. After two of them had a successful exit. He has worked with Facebook, WeChat, Twitter, with some time at the New York Times, and many other companies. He wrote some of the most influential papers on media and virality, including the paper that was the second most influential paper in 2018 across all disciplines on the topics. His recent book, The Hype Machine: How Social Media Disrupts our elections, our economy, and our health, and how we must adapt, is a topic of numerous conversations. And he spends time with many of the people here talking about those topics at PopTech, and you may have seen many other outlets presenting his ideas recently. Mini claim to fame that I'm not sure he would say is that not only is expert academic domain on the topic, he also is basically the person behind the scenes of the most viral picture by Kim Kardashian. At some point, he had a meeting with Kanye West that led to the most viral picture on the internet. So he's not just writes about the topic or research them. He actually puts his hands in the water and helps the topics really manifest themselves. He's won many teaching awards, grants. He's given some of the most popular talks at PopTech. Really a great friend and a person that inspires me time and again when we talk about interesting topics like the one we're going to discuss today. Scott Galloway is a marketing professor at Stern. He's the author of three books. The latest one is Post-Corona: From Crisis to Opportunity, which we're going to discuss today. He too is the founder of a number of companies, including L2, which was to Gartner, Red Envelope, which was one of the first e-commerce sites, and many more. He was elected by the World Economic Forum as global leader of tomorrow. Is one of the most popular professors at Stern, numerous teaching awards. He has an extremely popular podcast about business that where he's not shying away from presenting his positions. And many business leaders swear by his gospel and his crystal ball predictions about the future frequently. And in many ways, he's again one of those people that not just researches the topics and shares kind of outcome in different ways through his blogs and podcasts, but really dips his hands in the water. Last time I saw him, it was before the election, and he made it very clear where his opinions are, what he's going to do to help the election work. So he's a person that you will see not just talking about ideas, but actually experiencing firsthand and giving example to the things that he stands behind. I think that you're gonna be fascinated by the topic we're gonna talk, and to make this happen, I will shut up right now. Give you the stage and take it from here.
Awesome, thank you, Moran. Really appreciate it. Truly an honor and a pleasure to be here. Really excited for this conversation. Moran, your expert moderation that I've witnessed for years and years is going to be perfect, I think, for this. And Scott, it really is a pleasure to talk to you. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of listening to Scott's podcast, it is truly expertly done. I mean, he graciously had me on to talk about my book, and just one of the most well-prepared and deep sort of thinkers. And so it's really a pleasure for me to have a conversation with him anytime I get to, whether it's at the water cooler, just the two of us, or in a place like this. And obviously to the PopTech audience, what a great community, really excited to have this conversation with you. So digital disruption and disruption in general, I mean, it's no surprise that we're living in unprecedented times, right? The pandemic and the associated rise of digital work and digital interaction, it's creating a tremendous amount of disruption as well as opportunity. When the world was forced off the streets and onto the internet because of social distancing and stay-at-home orders, digital communication broke records. The social media platforms broke records. Zoom and Slack and all the rest of the sort of digital communication companies broke records. And now we're seeing both the promise and the peril that all of this entails. One sort of tip that I got from Scott, not directly in conversation, but in just watching him work, is that if you want to get people's attention, you should make predictions. And he's been really good at being right about a lot of things that he's predicted. I was really kind of tepid about making predictions. I didn't think that it was something that I was going to be good at, but I took a swipe at it in my book, and three things that I predicted that are just sort of ripped from the headlines about social media and its sort of impact today jump right out at me. The first is the Capitol riot. Experts understand that information is essential to the riot process. It motivates riots, it mobilizes them, it coordinates them, it legitimizes them, right? When we see social proof in social media that I'm going to actually be there and riot with you or protest with you, it legitimizes that mass action. And the steady stream of underlying misinformation that accompanied the anger and the shock that was happening sort of in protest of the election, and this idea that there was fraud and the election was stolen, were all part and parcel of this movement. And in the same way that the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement say that there would be no Black Lives Matter movement without social media, I also think that it was essential in the Capitol riot. And, it was foreshadowed by the plot to kidnap and kill the governor of Michigan. And every time I say that, I can't believe those words are coming out of my mouth, but that was coordinated over Facebook, right? And so the second ripped from the headlines example is GameStop, right? This is the rise of the crowd and its ability to change the outcomes in a financial market. We've got an SEC investigation going on. It's not clear there was anything illegal going on there, but certainly an example of the power of social media to move markets. And if you thought that Russia thought it was productive to meddle in the 2016 and 2020 US presidential election, imagine what they're thinking about the potential of disrupting economies after they see what happened with a single stock in GameStop. And third is disruptions in public health, right? So in the book, I talk about how misinformation can adjust or change the trajectory of the coronavirus pandemic. And this is foreshadowed by what we saw with the rise of measles in 2018 and 2019. And just about 10 days ago, Dodger Stadium vaccination site was shut down by anti-vaccine protesters that were consuming a lot of information on social media. But all of this also presents a ton of opportunities to address COVID. For instance, public health messaging over social media, vaccine acceptance campaigns, the ability to, notify people when they come in contact with people who might be COVID positive and so on, are examples of the promise and the peril that I really describe in my book. And there's also a tremendous amount of disruption to business, right? So the rise of remote work as a new reality, the displacement of entire industries, the unemployment that comes with it, the shutdowns, the dissolution of businesses. And large swaths of the economy are going to be remade or shifted to new business models, which presents an opportunity for innovation. It presents an opportunity for newness in the economy as well. So I think that there's really sort of three critical challenges of these unprecedented times that jump right out at me. The first and most obvious and most essential is that we've got to focus on defeating the pandemic and rebuilding the global economy. That's front and center. So anybody that, and everybody should, anybody that listens to Austin Goolsbee, former economic advisor to the Obama administration and professor at the Chicago Booth School, there is no economic recovery without dealing with the pandemic. And I think that we've made a number of missteps in how we deal with the pandemic. I'm very happy to see, increasing vaccination rates. I just learned that Scott has been vaccinated, which for me is a really important part of the vaccination process. But without solving the pandemic, we've got no hope of dealing with the economic fallout. Second, we've got to deal with the dramatic impact of social media. The three stakeholders that I outline in my book, the platforms, the policymakers, and the people, really need to think about how to leverage the levers that they have at their disposal to remake social media, to harness the promise and avoid the peril. And those levers are money, code, norms, and laws, the business models of the platforms, the design of the platforms and the algorithms, the norms, which is how we adopt and use the platforms, and the laws, which obviously is regulation, antitrust, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, election integrity, and the rest. And finally, I think a third giant challenge in terms of the promise and the peril, the opportunity and the disruption, is that industry will need to harness these new digital opportunities in a post-COVID world to realize new business models, to remake industries in more innovative and productive ways, to sort of clean out some of the old guard inefficient business models in ways that are productive. And I have to say that Scott really does a great job of addressing some of these challenges in his book, and is making meaningful strides in trying to kind of accomplish some of that in the marketplace with his own endeavors as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what he thinks about both the devastating disruption of coronavirus as well as the opportunity that lies ahead for us as we think about coming out of the pandemic in hopefully the coming months to a year. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Scott, and look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Sinan. Thanks, Moran. And I really, just along the lines of Sinan's very elegant and subtle book placement. Hi, I'm Scott Galloway. Sorry, cheap tactic. Okay, so the novel coronavirus. I think the enduring impact of the novel coronavirus will be seen as an accelerant as opposed to a change agent. And that is, if you look at, I think a useful exercise for every company and every person is to take the three most dominant trends in your corporation, your sector, and in your own personal life, and take the slope of the last 10 years and then project it out 10 years and ask yourself, are we here right now? So March of 2020, e-commerce was 18% of all retail. It had grown approximately 1% a year since 2000. Within 8 weeks, it jumped to 28%. So we had 10 years acceleration of e-commerce in 8 weeks. Online grocery accelerated 10 years. Again, more people were doing online grocery, but it jumped 10 years. It jumps about 7 years. The number of young people living at home was increasing. It was around somewhere in the 30s. Now it's over 50. There are more people living at home between the ages of 18 and 30 than living on their own. All kinds of crazy accelerations. Our government spending is where it was supposed to be in 2044. Hopefully that'll go back. But we've just seen everything that was happening. If something was going like this, it's now going like this. If something was going like this, it's now going like this. The good companies have been accelerated a decade forward and then discounted back in year zero interest rates. As far as I can tell, unless Tesla sells every electric vehicle in the world for the next 10 years, it's hard to back into its stock price. By the way, I said it was overvalued at $50 and it's at 800 right now. So whatever I say about Tesla, ignore. We're also seeing some dysfunctional components of our economy turn dystopian. We knew that there was a problem with income inequality. It's gone absolutely parabolic. When 1 in 5 households with kids are food insecure, when we've seen such a massive transfer of wealth from young to old, trillionaires in the last 30 years have grown their wealth from 1.9 trillion to 4 trillion, but minimum wage has grown from $7.25 to $7.25. The young were consistently getting the wrong side of the stick across a variety of metrics, but it's accelerated now. People under the age of 40 used to control 19% of the nation's wealth and now control 9% of the nation's wealth. So it's been an acceleration for both good and bad things that sort of played on our comorbidities. The economic trend that I think about and write a lot about is what I'm calling the great dispersion, and that is what happens when you have the source of value from a producer or supplier skip different parts of the supply chain, or the supply chain is reconfigured, thereby taking out friction and cost and adding more value. And there's some incredible opportunities here. I think the dispersion of headquarters. You're going to see a $12 trillion asset class, commercial real estate, lose 20 to 30% of its value because while we may be going back to the office, we're not going back as often. We'll go back 2-3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week, but people, companies, and peers are much more comfortable with you deciding to stay at home Thursday and Friday if you don't want to commute or you need to take care of your kids. So we're going to see a massive transfer of stakeholder value from commercial real estate to residential. That means the office industrial complex, whether it's a chopped salad restaurant or the lights, the fluorescent lights, or the REITs or the owners of those buildings, will hemorrhage value to restoration hardware, Sub-Zero, Sonos, lumber prices. Residential real estate will continue to accelerate in price. There's a dispersion across media. It's no longer about creative artists agency or Chris Nolan, the famous director, or movie theaters deciding who and when you get to see Wonder Woman 1984. It gets dispersed right to your own theater in the home. The dispersion of education. Sanan's organization is not as much Moran's, but definitely mine and Sanan's. We are drunk on luxury. We are no longer public servants, but luxury brands who create artificial scarcity such that we can transfer trillions of dollars from middle-class households to administrators and faculty whose every decision is focused on one goal, and that is to reduce our accountability and increase our compensation. Universities have totally lost the script. We are no longer about accelerating the unremarkable. I'm the proud, unremarkable son of a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary. Our household income was never more than $40,000. But America used to love the unremarkables. The admissions rate at UCLA was 60% when I applied, and I had to apply twice. Now it's 12%. And alumni brag that I would never get into my school if I had to apply now. Well, guess what? That means your daughter's not getting in. We have seen a dramatic escalation in a very unhealthy trend, and that is America used to be about getting the bottom 90% into the top 10%. Now it's all about getting the top 1% into billionaire status. Our fetishization of technology and billionaires has gone absolutely parabolic. It was a bit of a digression. Probably the most exciting thing beyond what I'd call the dispersion of education past campuses, which have used things like tenure and artificial constructs, including the campus, to not take their admissions rates up. Harvard has an endowment, the GDP of El Salvador, and yet doesn't increase its freshman class 1 seat. Stanford's tripled their endowment, tripled their applications, but just decided they don't want to increase their freshman class 1 seat. I think higher ed has literally lost the script. It has now transitioned from being the great upward lubricant in our society to the agent of casting. So hopefully the embrace of small and big tech and the comfort with remote learning will if we just take 50% of our classes online, we double the supply. That's the big opportunity. The elite universities won't do this. They'll double down on their luxury status, but the big state systems might embrace this, or at least that's what I'm hoping. The biggest opportunity is the dispersion of healthcare. 99% of the people who've contracted, endured, and developed antibodies to novel coronavirus will have never entered a hospital, much less a doctor's office. We have an opportunity to take healthcare from being a defensive, disease-driven industry to one that's more offensive And when I say offensive, we can play offense, push primary health care through smartphones, through smart speakers, give people the opportunity, the confidence, and the anonymity to start moving into preventive primary health care, and take what is the largest industry in the world, and that's U.S. healthcare, and turn it into a social good. So the dispersion of headquarters, the dispersion of education, the dispersion of media, the dispersion of healthcare are extraordinary opportunities. But be clear, a lot of the accelerants in our society have highlighted some of the negative things and some of the positive things. I think in retrospect, and I'll finish up here, I think we will look back on the stimulus packages as having been primarily a hate crime against younger and the unborn. I think we have thrown some loaves of bread and some circuses for the poor in the form of extended unemployment insurance. Absolutely a wonderful, righteous way to spend money. Vaccination programs, a righteous, wonderful way to spend money, such that we could transfer $750 billion to the wealthiest cohort in America, that's small business owners. We've decided to fetishize the restaurant owner. You know who owns a restaurant? Someone who's probably rich. And if they go out of business, someone younger than them gets to move in and pursue their own dreams. We have decided that the collective goal of the stimulus is to keep rich people rich. Unless you let the gale forces of creative destruction blow, you don't give young people the opportunity to grab their own wealth. The reason I'm economically secure is because in 2009, when the pre-existing rich were licking their wounds and selling stock, I got to buy Amazon at $120 a share. I got to buy Apple at $11 a share. I got to buy New York real estate at $800 a foot instead of $1,500. That is the whole point of capitalism. Capitalism is about protecting people, not companies. And we've decided with the stimulus that we need to be harsh and Darwinian with people and loving and empathetic with companies. So we need to bail out Delta Airlines. Burn, baby, burn. We are borrowing trillions of dollars from future generations, rubbing lipstick over the cancer of this stimulus by giving money to some people who actually need it, such that we can make the rich people richer. What's happened? 4 out of 5 people didn't need this stimulus. They stick it in the bank account. They stick it in the market. That explodes asset prices. Who owns 90% of all assets by gross dollar volume? The top 1%. Well done, America. Well done. Back to you.
Thank you. It's a good opening. Let me start with one question that kind of it hits very close to home. The 3 of us are professors in a business school, which you call, Scott, luxury brand schools. You say that education will change. So here's a pragmatic question. Will we have a job in 1 year, or are we all going to work for Apple University?
Well, we will, because we're outstanding. We're good at what we do. Our enrollments and our research is relevant, and we show up. We bring it. 2/3 of our colleagues should be put on an ice floe. And by the way, I think we work with some of the best faculties in the world. I think administrative costs have absolutely skyrocketed. 97 of the 100 highest paid civil servants in Massachusetts work for the University of Massachusetts. And they figured out a way to grow their compensation faster than inflation, and they figured out a way to increase tuition faster than inflation, while outcomes have either stayed flat or declined. I don't think we're going to be, I think you're going to see, I used to think that the luxury brands would partner with the elite universities. I think I was wrong. The elite universities are just going to double down on their exclusivity. But if Google and Apple were to start offering engineering programs and liberal arts programs, you'd see huge enrollments. We're not in the business of education. We're in the business of certification. And key to certification is the brand. And our brands are the strongest brands in the world. MIT, everyone says, what's the strongest brand in the world? It's Apple. No, it's not. No one gives $50 million to have their name on the side of a building at the Cupertino campus, but they'll do it at MIT. MIT and Stanford are the strongest brands in the world. So I think the 3 of us, as long as we continue to take teaching seriously and try and have relevant classes, I think we'll be fine. What's happening in education is happening in every other industry. And quite frankly, there's just more and more spoils going to the top 1% of personnel and universities. The applications at the top 50 universities have skyrocketed in COVID. So I think quite frankly, if you think you're in the top 10%, and about 60% of us think we're in the top 10%, I think there's probably going to be more spoils accreting to a smaller group of people. Sinan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, just speaking from my own personal self-reflection, as well as reflecting on what we do, I think that professors have to innovate now. And so the two best ways that I think professors need to innovate is that we have to get out of this idea of the ivory tower and start being, people who study and do. So the motto of MIT is mens humanis, hand in mind, learning by doing and doing by learning. And one thing that I've tried to do my whole career is to actually put my ideas to the test in the marketplace, but also in the realm of public policy and elsewhere, rather than just sit in an ivory tower and think about fancy theories. To really test whether any of it works in the real world. And that's through entrepreneurship. That's through, very large projects with nonprofit organizations that address HIV and AIDS or that address the coronavirus. So for instance, as director of the MIT IDE, when COVID hit, I essentially called a meeting and I said, we're stopping everything we're doing and we're pointing everything, all of our resources and intellectual capabilities at the coronavirus. And we started a bunch of very large projects using cell phone data to track the coronavirus, using, collaborating with the World Health Organization to launch the largest global survey of COVID behaviors, norms, and perceptions, which now has 1.6 million responses across 60 plus countries, running experiments to try and understand how we can get people to actually wear masks and socially distance and so on. That's an example of trying to eat your own dog food when it comes to learning by doing and doing by learning. And I think the second major innovation is one that Scott essentially alluded to, which is the need for more accessible digital education. And that's something that I've been pushing for and doing myself personally a lot at MIT, having put out 3 different online offerings that are accessible to anyone that doesn't have to sort of go to MIT and is accessible online and so on, and working with the university to expand edX and other types of online learning. So I think that all of those innovations require sort of thoughtfulness about what we represent as scientists and as educators, as well as thinking about what the goals of what we do are. So the MIT IDE devotes, a large fraction of its intellectual resources to trying to change outcomes in the world on topics like coronavirus or the negative impact of social media on democracy and our economy and our public health, in order to make ideas that matter.
Okay, let me start asking about the hype machine. First of all, can you define the term for me? What is a hype machine?
Yeah, the hype machine is the social media industrial complex. It's the entire social media economy. And the reason I call it the hype machine is because it's based on the attention economy. It essentially sells consumers' attention as an opportunity to persuade to large businesses, but also to nonprofits, to government organizations, to political campaigns, and so on. And it is the most important engine of sort of the digital economy. It is the thing that essentially directs people's beliefs, opinions, and perceptions of the world through their consumption of news, through their consumption of messaging, political messaging, nonprofit messaging, corporate messaging, and so on. And it is also, as I describe in my book, a direct line into people's behavior. Large-scale experiments have shown in sphere after sphere that social media messaging influences who we vote for, what products we buy, how we shop, what we eat, what we believe, what causes we support, where we give money, everything. And so it is a critical engine of all of the outcomes that we're seeing in society. And it's algorithmically intermediated and amplified by algorithms that are a black box, that we have no idea how they work because nobody has access to them. And yet they define who we friend next. So the evolution of the human social network, which is fast becoming humanity's central nervous system, and what information flows over that network, which are the feed algorithms. And those two algorithms in combination are creating the outcomes that we're seeing, whether it's the Capitol riot or the polarization of society or the GameStop stock price rise or vaccine misinformation, et cetera. And I think that it's high time we get under the hood and stop armchair theorizing about how these algorithms work and really start to understand scientifically how they're directing the impacts that we're seeing in society.
So let me follow up on that in a second. In your book, you tell a few stories about the negatives of, I'll pick Facebook, start with them. You tell a story of a tweet by AP that led to the losing of 140 billion because someone hacked into AP and said that Obama was injured. You speak about of course, the insurrection. But you also tell stories about positives, like the ice bucket challenge that raised the most amount of money in shortest time ever through Facebook, about the funding of a Nepal earthquake relief through Facebook. Overall, is Facebook net positive or net negative?
You know, I think it's hard to sum that equation because its impact is so vast in so many parts of the world. I mean, just look recently at Myanmar. Just look recently at different impacts around the world. When it comes to the positives, I think right now we're so focused on the negatives that we forget some of the positives. So, for instance, you mentioned when Nepal had its greatest earthquake in 100 years. Europe and the US donated something like $10 or $12 million to relief efforts, and Facebook spun up a Donate Now button and raised $15.5 million, more than Europe and the US combined, from 770,000 individual donors in 145 countries. And people laugh about the Ice Bucket Challenge, but it did raise $250 million with a B for ALS research in 8 weeks, which shows kind of the mobilizing potential of the technology. Research at Stanford and at MIT shows that Facebook creates about $370 billion in consumer surplus every year in the US alone. And 80% of Facebook's user base is outside of the US. In some countries, Facebook is the internet. In the Philippines, Facebook is the internet. In parts of Africa, Facebook is the internet. And that value comes from being able to start and run your small and medium-sized business over Facebook. It comes from an ability to find jobs, from access to life-saving health information, from access to meaningful human connection when we're all disconnected in the physical world. It comes from all sorts of sources that sometimes we forget about. That's not to say that there aren't negatives and downsides, and I clearly lay those out in the book, but I think that we have to remember the promise of it as well as the peril. Our biggest challenge now, and I'm a big fan of books like Surveillance Capitalism and by Shoshana Zuboff and Zucked by Roger McNamee, and the movie The Social Dilemma. But my book, I wrote it really to take off where those books and movies leave off, which is to ask, what can we do? What can we concretely do to achieve the promise of social media and avoid the peril? And it's really designed to give not 30,000-foot platitudes about what we do, but very specific recommendations, down and dirty recommendations for policymakers, the platforms, and the people about what we do next.
So, Scott, Sinan has basically 4 recommendations, 4 pillars. He said we should focus on the money, the code, the design of the platforms, the norms, and laws. What do you think is the right way to deal with the digital platforms?
So I think that antitrust, I think these terms have just gotten too powerful. I mean, people have a tendency to say the easiest way to process information is 0 or 1. Are they good or they're bad? And the answer is yes. I think we've been net gainers from big tech, but the problem is with the word net. We're net gainers from fossil fuels and pesticides, but we still have emissions and standards in an FDA. So our idolatry of innovators has let these companies run sort of unfettered. And I think the externalities have grown and grown and grown. People talk about current antitrust laws based on pricing. And that is if the price is the same or goes down to the consumer, you just leave them alone. But that's like asking a 7-year-old to wear the same jacket you gave him at 7, who's now 17. The laws just don't apply here because most Google and Facebook are free. And I would argue the non-economic costs as a father, as a citizen, have skyrocketed in terms of the cost being imposed on us. So I think big tech is a net good. I would say Facebook is probably at the point where it's a net bad. I own Amazon and Apple stock, and I give them a hard time. But I think on the whole, they're net positives. I think Facebook has come to a point where it's a net negative. Between the perversion of our elections, depression of teens, slow rolling, violence, or genocide in foreign countries, Facebook really is a net negative run by a sociopath and his $2 billion beard. They have levied tremendous damage on our nation and on our world. I think you break them up. Breaking a company up is not punishment. Typically, the shareholders win. Typically, the employees win. It's one of the few things the government's kind of batting 1,000 on. It's hard to look at antitrust action and say that was a mistake. Each of the 7 oil companies that were broken up the 28 from Standard Oil did really well. Each of the 7 telcos from the original Ma Bell went on to be worth more than the original Ma Bell, which is within just a decade. So antitrust, I think, across Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Google. I don't think antitrust works at Apple because the question is who gets the asset of the brand. Elegant antitrust not only increases competition, but it increases shareholder value. I think I'm going to do well. I think I'm going to be wealthier when Amazon and Apple are broken up. When Amazon and Google and Facebook are broken up. The next thing is regulation. I think the App Store needs to be regulated. 80% of revenues going through the app economy through one player, whether it's Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus. Apple gets somewhere between 3 and 12% of all revenues for all streaming media because they do own the rails. So I think we're going to have to regulate them. Also, I don't think we really make any changes till somebody does a perp walk. If somebody called us, I think most of us have kids, and said, "Hey, I can get your daughter into UCLA instead of USC," as UCLA is a far superior school to USC, but you have to give $50,000 to I'll give to a tennis coach. We'd all hang up the phone. Why? Because Aunt Becky did a perp walk. And right now, the algebra of disincentive around bribing someone to get your kid into college is working. The algebra of disincentive around big tech isn't working. If you fine Facebook $5 billion when they're worth $500 billion and indemnify them for anything wrong they've done up until that point, that's like putting a parking meter in front of someone's house that costs $100 every hour, and the parking ticket's 25 cents. What we're doing is effectively encouraging these companies to continue to break the law. So I think it's a combination of antitrust, regulation, and also I do think the most interesting thing is the AG in Texas, who is a total weirdo. So I hope the feds adopt it or take it on. But the antitrust pricing, cartel pricing suit against Facebook and Google in Texas is really important because one of the remedies for violating those laws is criminal prosecution. And there's nothing like getting senior executives to talk about what's really going on and who's really doing what at their firm than the prospect of a perp walk. I don't think it just isn't I'm not sure the financial markets have changed a hell of a lot because no one went to jail from 2008. I think until somebody does a perp walk at social media, they will continue to delay and obfuscate, continue to lie, and continue to promote algorithms of amplification that continue to divide us.
Can I bust up this kumbaya party and completely disagree with Scott? Would that be appropriate here?
So it's appropriate to disagree with Scott.
Okay, so while I agree with him that the externalities have grown dramatically and there is a ton of externalities, let me just talk about the breakup of Facebook. I disagree here. I think that breaking up Facebook does nothing to solve any of the problems that we have with social media, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the reason why we have market concentration in the social media economy is because the economy runs on network effects. And network effects economies tend towards market concentration. So if you break up the market leader without structural reforms to the economy itself, it'll just tip the next Facebook-like company into market dominance. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a tumor. You're not addressing the underlying causes of the market concentration in the first place. So what we need are structural reforms of the economy, which include interoperability legislation and social network and data portability legislation. There's the Access Act sitting in front of Congress now, which would force any social network greater than 100 million users to become interoperable. We did this with SMS messaging. We did this with instant messaging. It created competition. Research shows that it created a tremendous amount of competition. Social network portability, the historical analogy there is when you couldn't take your cell phone number with you and then you could. That created a ton of competition in the cell phone market. Research shows it created about $880 million of consumer surplus every quarter for years and years and years in Europe when it was instituted. When we, in the AOL Time Warner merger, when we forced AOL's AIM Instant Messenger to become interoperable with Yahoo and MSN, it went from 65% market share to 59% the year before to 55% 2 years later. Then it ceded the entire market to new entrants. So breaking up Facebook also doesn't solve fake news. It doesn't solve privacy. It doesn't solve election integrity. Each one of those problems needs its own legislative scrutiny as negative externalities that Scott correctly identifies. The other problem with breaking up Facebook in a networked industry is that consumer surplus comes from the connections. If you rip the connections apart without first imposing interoperability, you destroy consumer surplus. And so for all of those reasons, breaking up Facebook without structural reforms to the economy first is a mistake, in my opinion. Also, I think that people talk about, quote unquote, breaking up big tech, but as Scott correctly identifies, each one of these cases is very different. To talk about them in the same breath is a mistake. The competitive analysis of each of these is a really different case. And I won't go on too long about Apple and the other cases, but when it comes to the federal and state cases against Facebook, huge uphill climb here because there was merger oversight of the mergers that they now want to unwind, and they were approved. And yes, those oversight initiatives did say, well, you know, we reserve the right to revisit this in the future, but imagine the chilling effect this has on mergers going forward. If the government can say, yeah, we have oversight over that merger, we grant it now, and then 8 years later, after you've put hundreds of billions of dollars into this company, we're going to say it's anti-competitive. That's not the right message for antitrust authorities to send. We need structural reforms of the economy. Then we need, each one of the market failures to be addressed: privacy, election integrity, misinformation, and so on. And I will say, I saw a comment, I think it was by Robert, that said, we really need to look to the employees of these companies as a possible solution. I agree. That's the norms that I describe in the book of Money, Code, Norms, and Laws. We need the public to engage and delete Facebook, stop hate for profit style movements. We need employees to be whistleblowers, and we need them to say, we don't support this kind of policy at our company. If you hit them in the place where they can't recruit the best talent because they don't believe in the mission, that is something that they take very seriously. I'm not letting Scott answer that, even though I'm sure he has some rebuttal. I want to take us to a different topic that is still in the same.
Oh, come on. I don't get to respond to that.
I slipped him a 20 so I could jab and then parry.
He floods the zone with this MIT high IQ blah blah, and I don't get to respond.
You can sneak it into my next question to you. So here's the next question.
It's like a presidential debate where the respondent tells the moderator, "I'd like to answer the last question."
You will sneak it. So here's what I want to know next. In the last months, we've seen something that we've not seen before, which is Twitter banning sitting presidents from basically using their platform. This is something that had never happened before. Scott, what do you think about
that? So I think it's a sad statement when we no longer turn to our government officials or the Senate to essentially punish a criminal who's incited an insurrection. We don't look to the Senate. We don't look to the FBI when the president incites a mob and they go hunting for the Speaker of the House and the Vice President. I think that is, we hope that Kayak, Facebook, and Twitter ban his account, and that Airbnb doesn't rent out places in the Capitol. We applaud Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg for canceling or suspending the president's account 1,449 into 1,460 days of his tenure, which is tantamount, in my view. I have a teenage son. If I come home and I see him vacuuming the living room, your first thought is, well, isn't that great? And then about a moment later, you mean that you find out that he hasn't adopted a new concern for cleaning the house, but he threw a rave where he was selling Molly and the dog is pregnant and the garage is on fire. They deserve absolutely no credit. They let hate reign on their platforms. Twitter suspending his account. And by the way, I'm a shareholder in Twitter. Too little, too late, boss. And they remember the whole argument, it would be impossible to moderate our platforms. Impossible. Well, guess what? They count for one account and 70% of misinformation on the election went away. There's supposedly 20 to 30 accounts responsible for a third of all misinformation on these platforms. I believe it. I believe an eighth grader and a laptop spending 2 hours a day in Sinan's office could clean up 60% of the misinformation on Facebook and Twitter. But here's the problem. It's really profitable for them. When consumers see content trying to encourage Black people not to take the vaccine, it outrages people. And every outrage is another action that can be monetized with more Nissan ads. So they deploy these weapons of mass distraction to ensure they don't have to create algorithms of citizenship. They create algorithms of amplification around rage. So Twitter banning Trump, wait, too little, too late. Too little, too late. And I just want to real quickly talk about Sinan's comments. I think we largely agree here. I think interoperability is key. You should be able, there hasn't been a social media platform of any size started since 2011 in America. It's one of the fastest growing sectors, and there's no new businesses, which I think is unhealthy for the economy. So I agree you need interoperability. But if you were to, for example, I think WhatsApp would not have let Slack or Zoom emerge. Instead, it's being used as sort of a digital body bag to just feed action into the corpus of Facebook. You've lost some of the most talented executives from WhatsApp and from Instagram because they don't want to just serve the data bag. And let's assume that Sinan is right, that this is an industry or companies that benefit from network effects and concentration of power because they can run at a scale that's just better when you let one aggregate. Then okay, I'm going to assume that that's the truth. That, as far as I know, is called a utility. And utilities are regulated. And so if that's in fact the case, then I want regulators sitting on top of them going, we seem to keep getting people in India pulled out of cars and hanged because of false rumors circulating on WhatsApp. And you keep kind of deploying Sheryl Sandberg to talk about what a serious issue it is and do nothing. If in fact there are the types of network effects that for a public good, we need concentration of power that we've gotten to, then fine, they're a utility and regulate them. I don't think that's the case. I think to Sinan's point, if we get to interoperability, it would create a ton of opportunities for smaller networks to offer and fill different niches.
I'm seeing a lot of questions coming from the audience. I'm going to in a second start channeling those to you guys. Here's one kind of big question that I think I wanted both of you to give me as maybe a message to the entire population. So Scott in his book has this quote I like, which is, "A crisis is a terrible thing to waste." We have a lot of people here who are influential in the business world, in the financial world, thought leaders. Give me, Sinan, your ask from the community here. What do you want the people who are listening to you right now to do after this conversation to kind of help the cause of controlling the hype machine better?
Well, I mean, I think that in terms of businesses and in terms of people, if we sort of put regulation aside for a minute, I think that there needs to be a shift in the zeitgeist about these platforms, whether it's the top tech talent and where they decide to work, whether it's businesses and whether they decide to, participate in movements like the Stop Hate for Profit movement, whether it's individuals that, decide how they participate in social media. The notion that we can just sort of go on with business as usual has to just be dispelled at every level of our society, whether it's a business owner, whether it's a user of the platforms, or whether it's an employee or a tech worker or somebody who's considering working for these companies. So the norms that we establish with these companies is absolutely essential. And the money is where, they are listening the most. So, Stop Hate for Profit was a drop in the bucket of Facebook's revenue. It was tiny. But I also think that as these businesses raise the alarm, suddenly you see policymakers take seriously the possibility of regulating social media for the first time. We've been talking about the perils of social media for years, but in the last 6 months, you're starting to see some idea that there might actually be regulation. And so that is a powerful motivator for policymakers to do their part. Ultimately, I think that all of these oars need to be rowing in the same direction for us to have a chance. So I think that all 4 of the levers that I described, the money, code, norms, and laws, have to be rowing in the same direction if we're to have a chance. And all 3 of the stakeholders, the policymakers, the platforms, and the people, all have to be rowing in the same direction. And I don't think that this is something that we can just kind of like hope gets better. It's not surprising to me that we're seeing such dramatic flashes of the peril in just kind of like weeks upon weeks upon weeks. And every week there's a new story about something horrific going on in some part of the world as a result of the platform's policy or the platform's designs or the way that these technologies are being used. We're going to continue to see that happen. We're going to see it escalate until things change.
Scott, I'll ask a similar question to Sinan. I asked him what's his call for this community. If you had the ears of the CEOs of the companies you speak about, Google and Facebook, let's say, what would you advise them?
I wouldn't provide any advice to Mark Zuckerberg. I think he's a sociopath. I think that when he finds out that he's levying the kind of division he's levied on America, I think he sleeps really well. I can't even imagine speaking to him. I think the CEOs of the other firms are generally speaking good people, who live in a capitalist society whose vision gets blurred when it's raining money. I think all of us are subject to incremental bad decisions when it means we can have better healthcare, more opportunities for our children. And in a capitalist society, that means having more money. So I can't even imagine coaching a guy like Mark Zuckerberg. I coach, and I'm boasting right now, but it's true. I coach a lot of big tech, or I coach a lot of tech CEOs. And I think Sundar at Google just wants to get back to product. I think when his company's been broken up, he'll have a huge sigh of relief. I think Jeff Bezos has just decided he'd rather spend the next year in Saint-Tropez and at the Cannes Film Awards than in a congressional meeting. So, these guys, my sense is, look, they're doing their job to a certain extent. It's we as citizens who aren't doing our job. We need to elect people that have the backbone to hold these companies and these industries to the same standards we've held other industries. So, look, I work with, I've worked with about a third of the CEOs and CMOs of the biggest 100 companies in the world over the last decade, and some in big tech. And generally speaking, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be the agents of capitalism and increase their earnings. And we are supposed to elect people to recognize the externalities with unfettered private power. And it's gotten to the point where private power has overrun Washington. Amazon has more full-time lobbyists in Washington than there are sitting US senators. Facebook has more people in their PR comms department manicuring Mark and Cheryl's image than are in the newsroom at the New York Times. So we've just become overrun, and we need to massively overfund the DOJ, the FTC, and we need executives or elected representatives, more than 8%, who understand technology. And also, it's not even their fault. It's Americans' fault. We love to hit our politicians. They were educated in American schools, raised in American households. And the head of the EU Competitiveness Commission, I think Jean-Paul Juncker, said, we all know what needs to be done. We just don't know how to get reelected after doing what needs to be done. So, who's at fault here? Yeah, the executives at Facebook are generally sociopathic people. But in general, the number 2 most wanted list is voters. Until we put it, the world isn't what it is. The world is what we make of it. We've dealt with problems like this before, and I think we'll deal with these now, but it's a function of the world we want to live in. And for some reason, we keep nominating or voting in people who don't want to take the time to understand these issues or are afraid of these companies and feel outgunned.
Can I just add one point, which is that if I were to talk to the voters and say, what kind of policies should I be looking into to support? Let me give a couple of ideas that come right to mind for me. One, we've got to have federal privacy legislation in the United States. I mean, how overdue is that? We can learn from the mistakes of the GDPR and understand the positive effects that it had and do it right in the United States. A patchwork of 50 states' privacy legislations is not sustainable, and we have an opportunity to do something great there. Reforming Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is another example. Repealing it is a disaster for the free internet, but it can be reformed in ways that are productive. Legislation that protects our elections, like the Secure Our Democracy Act, the FIRE Act, the Voting System Cybersecurity Act, all of those need to be passed yesterday. In terms of competition, the Access Act, as I mentioned, is really an important piece of legislation to bring competition to the social media industry, which we absolutely need, because that's what's going to provide incentives for the executives at the companies to actually change. When they face competition, then they'll change to be competitive on dimensions other than just saying, well, if you want to talk to your friends, you have to stick with us. In addition, I kind of feel that the platforms need to take the lead on the spread of misinformation. And I think that there are known ways that large-scale experiments show can work in those areas, and they have to be responsible for that. So there are a number of sort of regulatory ways that voters can hold politicians' feet to the fire in terms of moving forward in a regulatory way.
I'm already behind because I wanted to open the flow for everyone to ask questions, and there's a long list of questions that I should channel in a second. Let me ask you one final question to the two of you. How is doing a book tour during a pandemic?
I've only done a book tour during the pandemic.
Was it pleasant? Do you feel like you get the right questions you want?
It's high leverage. I can have many conversations with people around the world every single day. It lacks intimacy, and I really miss giving high fives and hugs. But I also really appreciate the reach of the digital platform. It's the promise and the peril all over again in a microcosm.
Scott, how is doing a book tour during a pandemic?
It was remarkably. It's no real different for me because I'm going to use a media term here. Or a market academic term. I'm a total media whore. I'm on media every day, constantly pushing something. So lately, I've just been pushing my book, and the pandemic to a certain extent was sort of invented for people whose primary product is information based. I have a studio. I'm in Soho. I have a studio in my home in Florida. I just walk in and I'll be on CNBC tonight. I'll be on MSNBC in the morning, and I do that a lot. And so, just for the 2 months post a book, I just hold up my book. But it's really obviously what the interesting thing about publishing is. What you recognize is they don't pay to write the book; they pay to market it. And I think one of the reasons that I get I'm blessed in terms of the publisher and the compensation for my books is they look at your platforms. I mean, for anyone who's an author out there, I would say if you want to get a book published, get your Twitter numbers up, because it's just striking how much they look at your ability to market the book. You should also assume your publisher, and I mean, you basically have to market it yourself. There really is no marketing budget. They don't. Moran, you've written books, so I mean, it's just it's like looking at your publisher and everything. It's like your relationship with your siblings. Just expect them to do nothing, and you'll never be disappointed. But now it's really about marketing yourself. Anyway, long-winded way of saying it was absolutely no different for me because I'm desperately insecure and need the reaffirmation of being on TV all the time.
Thank you so much for the two of you. I think we covered a lot. The list of questions is really long. So I'm gonna let anyone who has a question kind of jump with a question. Otherwise, I'm gonna start reading the ones that I have in front of me from the list. But if you guys wanna use the floor to actually ask it in person, feel free. I would recommend starting questions with the letters W or H rather than with your opinions on things, but I would take opinions if they're relevant. Anyone wants to, the floor is yours.
Hey, Scott, I've got a question from here in Seattle. So Dan Levitan's a good friend by way of introduction. So if the net worth of the under 40 has gone from 19 to 9, and pre-COVID, the net worth of aging baby boomers was 73% of the wealth in America, is COVID going to accelerate the distribution of wealth because of older people dying and the money getting transferred?
Sir, what's your name?
Buzz Bruggeman.
Hey, Buzz. Thanks for the question. I love Dan Levitan. He was one of my investors in the 90s, and he and I used to take walks in Midtown and talk about spirituality and love. I miss Dan. I mean, he's fine. He's around. I just don't see him as often. So I don't think it does because the majority of the wealth transfer takes place from people in their 80s and 90s and goes to other boomers. So it's not going into the pockets of 22 and 25-year-olds. In addition, the majority of the mortality across COVID is being inflicted on the poor. Black families are dying, or Black Americans are dying at 2 to 3 times the rate as white Americans. And so I don't think the wealth transfer, I don't think it's an indirect or an unwitting form of income redistribution. I don't think that. And if it's really weird, the American life expectancy for the first time ever went down 3 years in a row in the US in 2017, 18, and 19, largely because of the opioid crisis. And then in 20, it started going back up. And now it's come way back down. It's actually gone down by a year among most Americans, and it's down 2 to 3 years amongst people of color. What you're going to see is the life expectancy will skyrocket post-herd immunity because so many of the vulnerable have been taken out. I mean, when you think about, and this diverges from your question, so the short answer is I don't think it solves the problem. I think the money's just going to end up in a 65-year-old boomer's hands from their 90-year-old parents. And also, I think income transfer, I think what you want is the way to make money is to work for it, but the way you create what I call the most productive money is giving people huge opportunities to work and make a lot of money. I don't think inherited wealth, I think inherited wealth is not as productive as money that's given to people with great opportunities. But there is, I mean, there's just some staggering statistics around what's going on in terms of wealth. Lost my train of thought, but I don't think it's going to get us. I don't think there's going to be an unnatural UBI, if you will, that we weren't expecting. We were expecting from this.
Thank you, Buzz. Other questions? If there's time, I'm gonna fill it with another question. Why is the stock market going up, Scott?
Well, that's easy. 4 out of 5. Well, I'm sorry, Moran. Did you have a 4 out of 5 people who received the stimulus didn't need it? Savings rates went from 7% to 34%. You have $1 trillion in additional stimulus. You've had a net loss of $50 billion in total compensation. That's a bit misleading because the people who've lost their jobs are typically lower income employees. So you have $1 trillion in stimulus in people's hands, and you have $500 billion in incremental savings because people aren't going to the Disney or to the Olive Garden. So you have $1.5 trillion on the sidelines that either goes into people's bank accounts or goes into the stock market, which does two things. It sends the NASDAQ up, and it sends interest rates down, which is this chaser effect to asset inflation. So what happens? People who own real estate, people who own stocks are living their best lives. I mean, kind of the dirty secret of this pandemic is if you're in the top 10%, COVID has meant more time with Netflix, your family, and your wealth has exploded. So I think it's entirely natural that the stock market has exploded. And we basically maxed out the NASDAQ or maxed out our credit card to fuel the stock market on the backs of, I think, the unborn. I just think it's collectively, I think our policy around COVID comes down to this. 500,000 Americans dying is bad. More Americans dying each day than in each month than between 3 and 8 months of World War II is really bad. But what would be profoundly tragic is if the NASDAQ went down. That's our priority.
Sinan, there's a question here from Nicole who asks, what's a specific reform that you recommend for Section 230?
Wow, great question. Thanks, Nicole. It's good to see you virtually. Well, I think that repeal is a disaster because if you repeal it, one of two things happen. Either—
Can you explain what it is first? Can you explain?
Yeah, so Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act provides a shield from civil liability to social media companies and companies that are online intermediaries of information, but not kind of publishers in a loose use of the word. And that civil shield is supposed to prevent them from being sued from what's said by one of their 3 billion users to another of their 3 billion users online. And if you repeal Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, one of two things will happen. Either the platforms will not moderate anything because they'll say, if we're going to be liable for our moderation decisions, then we're not going to make any moderation decisions at all. And in that case, social media becomes more of a swamp than it already is. Or they'll moderate everything by running everything by legal before they put it on their platforms, which will create a chilling effect on speech and will lead to a dramatic censorship. But what we need to draw the line between free and harmful speech. So obviously the First Amendment doesn't apply to these platforms because they're not public spaces and it's not government suppressing the speech. These are private companies that can make moderation policy decisions. But while I believe in free speech and while I think that we should, that it's a cornerstone of democracy and the marketplace of ideas, I can also provide examples that are existence proofs for why there should be a line between free and harmful speech. I think we can all agree that you shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theater. I think we can all agree that we don't want live streaming of mass murders like the one we saw in Christchurch, New Zealand, happening on Facebook. And these are examples that there needs to be a line between free and harmful speech. But the question is, how should we draw this line? Who should get to draw this line? And I believe that power should be reserved for our most deliberative and representative bodies, our legislatures and our parliaments, and through the courts in case law. And I believe that that's a better place than, say, a 5-person politically appointed commission like the FTC or the FCC, because those are political appointments that are necessarily politicized. I think that that the Congress needs to do more to draw the line, like, for instance, the Stop Sex Trafficking Act, which was nearly unanimously passed in the Congress, and other types of legislation that draws those boundaries. Now, we can debate about whether that specific act was good or bad for sex workers, and we have debated that. But I think that's the right process for drawing those lines because it's representative and it's deliberative. I also believe that there's way too much corporate money on Capitol Hill. And the way you do that is not by breaking up Facebook, but by passing legislation like HR 1 to get corporate money out of government. And that is a really important part of cleansing our political system.
Thank you so much. I know that Scott has to leave us any minute now. So here's my final question to you, Scott. And with that, I'm going to let you go to the next meeting you have right now. What is one behavior that you changed in using those platforms during the writing of your book? Is there anything that kind of affected you personally?
So look, I'm do as I say, not as I do. I'm addicted to Twitter, and I think Twitter has made me an angrier, uglier person. I think that the algorithms reward people dunking on one another. I don't think they reward being generous and thoughtful. I don't think they reward a thoughtful discussion. And I've tried to take stock of my own behavior where I think, okay, do I really need to take opportunities to highlight bad comments? Do I need to get back in people's faces when they are critical of me? Do I need to change my positions because the mob comes for me when I say that day traders are going to lose 85% of their money and that this Reddit movement is nothing but a bunch of young people bored with phones and stimulus who are being fooled by people claiming they should hold the line, which means they're about to get a spear in the chest, and I get tens of thousands of angry young people. Do I change my view because the Twitter mob comes from me? So I would say social media for me, and maybe it's because I haven't leveraged it correctly, has not been a good thing. And it's also, I have a 13-year-old boy. I don't like what's going on his phone. It's very worrisome to me. When I hear some of the interactions, and we have this deal, I let him do almost whatever he wants on his phone, as long as I get to check it, and as long as he includes me on, or I get to follow him on stuff. But I think social media platforms their algorithms have been programmed towards divisiveness, anger, and it's I think it's a really serious problem. All of our colleagues, Jonathan Haidt at NYU, has written really eloquently in The Coddling of the American Mind that we have an explosion in teen depression, and it's a function, he thinks, of two things: the coddling of kids, concierge and bulldozer parenting, where we do so many sanitary wipes on their lives that they don't develop their own immunities. But the second thing is social media, especially among young girls who not only don't get invited to a party, but get to see it play out in real time on their phones. And when I think about, I get so angry at myself that I get upset because of social media, and I'm old enough to modulate it. I wonder what's happening to a lot of people out there that aren't old enough to modulate it. So, long-winded way of saying the change that's come to me from social, it's been really good for me professionally. It's created a lot of awareness for me. It's created a lot of economic value for me. But I think emotionally and psychologically, it's been a negative for me.
That's not pleasant way to end, but thank you for your time, Scott Galloway. Really pleasure to talk to you always. And I know that Sinan, you're staying with us, so I'm directing the next couple of minutes of questions to you still. Same question to you. How did the last year change your usage of those platforms and the media?
Well, it's funny that Scott mentioned his kids. My son is 7. He's going to be 8 in a couple of months here. And he had absolutely no access to digital technologies until the coronavirus pandemic. And now he fixes my laptop. So it's basically, a complete 180 in terms of our policies, because he goes to school online, so he has to have access to technology now. And we fought as hard as we could for as long as we could to keep him off of it. And now he's on it, and it's hard. I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about the GameStop stock price, and the comments on there were very similar to what Scott described in terms of the mob coming for you. Because, I didn't, based on what I was seeing, I didn't buy into this David versus Goliath story, which ended up being complete hocus pocus. That actually, in the article I wrote, that, wait a minute, it seems like there are a lot of institutional investors part of this conversation looks like BlackRock made $3 billion, and the CEO of Chewy had, 9 million shares of GameStop when he was part of this conversation on YouTube and so on. Is this really David versus Goliath, or is this Goliath versus David? And I got so much hate comment about, oh, you just don't want to see the little guy win. And, this is the rise up of the retail investor against the hedge funds. And I was saying, no, what I'm trying to say is that, let's wait and see, because we're watching a plane crash in real time, but the plane is still at 30,000 feet. My feeling is that the price is going to drop dramatically on this stock, and lots of retail investors are going to be hurt. And that's exactly what happened. And so I agree with Scott that suddenly opinions are an opportunity for personal commentary. And that's the state of affairs with social media. I think that the marketplace of ideas has been warped in a way because of it. And I'll just go on a very brief rant about why I think that is, which is how did we arrive at the like button? Okay, just as an example, why the like button? Why is it that popularity is the thing that we want to hold up as being our gold standard for what's important to us in society? Why isn't there a "this taught me something" button, or a truth button, or a wellness button, or a this was a civics lesson button? Why is this a who's the most popular person here and let's listen to them? That was just an accident of engineering. And by the way, a lot of what we're experiencing are accidents of engineering. So, one thing that I talk extensively about in the book is this notion of clustering and homophily in social networks, which is that, social networks tend to be clustered and homophilous, which means that birds of a feather flock together. People tend to make connections with people who are like themselves. But at some point, they devised an algorithm called the PYMK algorithm, or the people you may know algorithm. It started at LinkedIn, but it now exists on Facebook and everywhere else. This is what recommends your next connection to you. And as they were trying to figure out how to write those algorithms, they realized that, well, I don't want this algorithm to have to sift through the 3 billion people on social media to recommend the next person to sin on. How can I make this more efficient? And they decided, well, I won't look at all of the 3 billion people. I'll start by just limiting it to, in fact, I will limit it to the friends of Sinan's friends. And what that did was it created way more clustering and birds of a feather flocking together than we would expect in nature. And that created more people being exposed to ideas like their own ideas than we would expect in nature. That stifled diversity, and it encouraged polarization into these ossified camps of opinion, where you're really different from those who hold a different opinion and really similar to everybody you're listening to online. And that's been shown in large-scale experiments on Facebook, stuff that we've done on Spotify and elsewhere. And this all came from an engineering shortcut. It wasn't from a desire to figure out how this algorithm was going to affect society. It came from an engineering shortcut. And when I talk to, people who work in these companies, they say to me about these algorithms, yeah, these algorithms are going around closing triangles in the human social network much more than we would expect in nature. Accident of engineering.
I'm going to ask my last question to you, and then I'm going to turn it to Lita to conclude this afternoon or evening together. You said something in the last sentence that kind of I want to elaborate on. You said, when I talk to those people, this is what they tell me. What was the response from, say, people on Facebook and Google when your book came out? Did you get any kind of call from, I don't know, people that there who said, I didn't like that, I loved that, finally you exposed this or that? Was it lukewarm? What did they think about your book?
Well, I got a couple of calls. I got a call to consider being the expert witness in Facebook's antitrust trial, which I turned down, and it was potentially a setup for life type of financial situation, which I couldn't see being part of. And I got calls to give talks at these companies at their various, talks that they have, and I'm doing that because I think it's important to really have these conversations. I think that one thing that is essential to the next step is greater transparency. We don't know how a lot of this works. A lot of what we've done, that paper that you mentioned that was, Twitter's, we did a 10-year study of the spread of fake news online, which Altmetrics, said was the second most influential scientific publication of 2018 about how fake news spreads faster than the truth. We did that. We were able to do that because we collaborated with Twitter. They gave us access to the entire historical archive. We can't do those kinds of studies without getting on the inside. They're nowhere near as effective. We can't really understand it. So we need more transparency about how the algorithms work, what they're doing, what the outcomes are of different versions of the algorithm. We need to be able to run experiments and so on. But this is something I call the transparency paradox, which is that we're asking them to platforms to be simultaneously more open and secure at the same time. And we have to remember that the Cambridge Analytica scandal started with Facebook sharing data with a university, Cambridge University. And so there are dangers to openness, but we need that transparency. So we have to find ways to thread this transparency paradox, finding ways for the platforms to be more open and secure at the same time. And a good way to do that, for instance, is data safe harbors, is pursuing I'm losing my word. There's a maybe somebody in the audience can help me. There's an algorithmic process for obscuring individual level data while differential privacy. So differential privacy was the way that Facebook released a bunch of data to Social Science One. That's another way to sort of thread the transparency paradox. But we need more transparency. We need to get under the hood and understand with science how these platforms work if we're going to reform them to achieve the promise and avoid the peril. And part of that is me and others going to these platforms, giving talks, having conversations, encouraging ways that we can do more of that transparency, encouraging work.
Well, I think you did a great job in writing this book and summarizing those ideas and offering a very concrete path to how to do it. And I think that, and I hope that everyone who's been with us today will get a chance to read the book and experience the many stories and your views on them, both from your personal experiences and where you think we're heading. And I think it was a really fantastic.
Can I just quickly say a quick thank you to PopTech, to Litha, to you, Moran, but also I just want to say what's up to a bunch of people I see in the audience who I miss dearly: Ben, Kevin, Robert, Nicole, Nick. I have to scroll through various screens here to see other people that I know. I really wish I could give you guys hugs and high fives in person, and I very much look forward to doing that again very soon. I miss you all very much.
Well, Sinan, thank you. One of the hallmarks of PopTech when we get to see each other in person for the annual conference is that we make a huge commitment to hosting thoughtful, provocative conversations. And I have to say we were able to pull that off here tonight in the virtual space, thanks to you, Scott, Moran's expert moderation. And of course, I will reflect back on Sinan's comments. It's so lovely to see so many people that are dear friends and community members. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for contributing in such a meaningful way. And we can't wait to see you next month, and keep an eye on the newsletter. We announce the upcoming talks all the time, and they're just as highly spirited as this. So warm thoughts to all of you, and good evening. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.